Why is it that so many students are constantly broke, living paycheck to paycheck, barely making ends meet? I remember back in college, I was eating Wonder Noodles almost every night, and I thought that was just normal student life. But here's the truth. Being broke in school isn't just about not having money. It's about falling into a cycle that most people never escape. In this video, we're breaking down exactly why students stay broke, the hidden habits, mistakes, and mindset traps, and more importantly, I'll show you the proven steps to fix it so you can finally start building real financial freedom even as a student. Most students find themselves stuck in the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck, and the problem is bigger than it seems on the surface. At first glance, it feels like it's just a lack of money, but in reality, it's a mindset that traps students in a pattern they carry into adulthood. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, every dollar is already spoken for before it even hits your account. Rent, tuition payments, groceries, transportation, and maybe even a few nights out with friends quickly consume everything, leaving no breathing room. The bigger issue is that this habit conditions people to survive instead of plan, to react instead of prepare, and it creates the illusion that being broke is normal for a student. The solution starts with shifting the mindset from survival mode to intentional planning. Even if the income is low, the key is learning to manage it in a way that stretches each dollar further and prioritizes stability over temporary comfort. It's not about having thousands saved, it's about breaking the cycle where money comes in and disappears within days. Students can start by creating a simple spending plan, literally just writing down what money comes in and where it needs to go. By setting aside even the smallest percentage, like 5% or 10% into savings, the paycheck-to-paycheck trap starts to loosen. The habit matters more than the amount because it teaches delayed gratification and builds the foundation for long-term financial security. A practical example would be a student working part-time at a coffee shop, earning around $400 a month after taxes. The natural instinct is to spend almost everything on day-to-day costs like eating out with friends, ride shares, or impulsive purchases. But let's say this student decides to take control. They create a plan where $50 immediately goes into a separate savings account, another $50 is set aside for emergency expenses like a sudden textbook or car repair, and the remaining $300 covers essentials like food and transportation. That simple adjustment shifts the cycle. Instead of barely scraping by every month and starting over at zero, the student slowly builds a safety net. Another way to break out of the paycheck-to-paycheck mindset is to reduce dependency on variable, emotional spending. Convenience is a huge drain on student budgets. Ordering food instead of cooking, paying for rides instead of taking public transport, or buying coffee every morning adds up faster than most realize. When students substitute small conveniences with cheaper habits, like meal prepping or making coffee at home, the difference can be dramatic. That $5 coffee every morning adds up to over $100 a month, which could instead be rerouted into savings or even invested. The choice is rarely about having no money, but rather about where the money is consistently going. There's also a psychological component. When you constantly run out of money, you start to believe that being broke is inevitable, and that belief becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. The fix comes from proving to yourself, even with small wins, that you can control your financial situation. For example, setting a challenge to live on $20 less per week and funneling that $20 into savings builds both confidence and a financial cushion. Over time, those small actions compound and give students the feeling of progress, which is the exact opposite of being trapped in the paycheck-to-paycheck grind. One powerful example I've seen is a student who worked a minimum wage job while going through college. Instead of accepting the idea that she had to live broke, she tracked her expenses down to the dollar. She realized she was spending nearly $200 a month on rideshare apps. By switching to a bus pass and walking more, she cut that expense down to $50. That $150 difference went straight into a high-yield savings account. Over the course of a year, she had nearly $2,000 saved, something most of her classmates couldn't imagine possible. She didn't make more money than them, she just stopped living paycheck to paycheck by making her money serve her priorities rather than her impulses. This problem is less about how much money students make and more about how they use what they have. The solution isn't glamorous, but it's effective. Plan ahead, save even the smallest amounts, and cut out unnecessary spending that keeps you trapped in survival mode. Once that cycle is broken, even just a little, students begin to experience what it feels like to have control over money instead of money controlling them. Overspending on lifestyle and convenience is one of the most common reasons students stay broke, and the problem is deeply tied to social pressure and the culture of instant gratification. Students often feel like they need to keep up with their peers, whether that means going out for dinner multiple times a week, upgrading to the latest phone, or buying clothes to fit in with the latest trends. On top of that, the convenience-driven economy has made it incredibly easy to spend without even realizing it. Food delivery apps, ride shares, streaming subscriptions, and impulsive online shopping pile up, and because each purchase feels small, students don't notice the financial drain until their accounts are empty. The problem isn't just the spending itself, but the way it normalizes the idea that luxuries are necessities and that lifestyle upgrades are simply part of being a student. The solution requires separating genuine needs from convenience-based wants and then creating systems to control lifestyle spending. The first step is awareness. Most students underestimate how much they spend on discretionary items. By tracking every dollar for 1 or 2 months, patterns emerge. A student might discover that $150 a month is going to fast food or $100 to subscriptions they barely use. Once these habits are visible, they can be adjusted. The goal isn't to cut out everything enjoyable, but to design a budget that prioritizes essentials first, while still leaving some room for fun without letting it take over. For convenience spending, the best approach is substitution. Instead of ordering food 3 times a week, a student might commit to cooking at home for 4 nights and saving delivery for 1. Instead of using rideshares daily, investing in a monthly bus pass or bike can cut transportation costs dramatically. A practical example would be a student who spends 12 a day on campus lunches because it's quicker than preparing food at home. Over the course of a 20-day school month, that adds up to 2 to 40. By switching to meal prepping, making sandwiches, pasta, or simple rice dishes at home for around $3 per meal, the same student spends only $6 for the month. That one change frees up $180. Which could go into savings, help pay down debt, or cover unexpected costs. The solution here doesn't demand deprivation, but rather intentional trade-offs. Spending is fine when it's chosen, but it becomes a problem when it's automatic. Another example is the hidden drain of subscriptions. Many students sign up for free trials of streaming services, music apps, or software tools, only to forget about them. A 10 monthly subscription might feel harmless, but 5 of those easily add up to $5,000 a month or $6,000 a year. For a student on a tight budget, that's significant. By auditing subscriptions and canceling the ones that aren't actively used, they not only reduce expenses, but also begin to question their spending habits more critically. This process creates a mindset shift from passive consumer to intentional spender. There's also the issue of lifestyle creep, the tendency to spend more as soon as income increases. A student who takes on a part-time job might see an extra $300 coming in every month, but instead of saving it, they immediately start eating out more or upgrading their wardrobe. This reinforces the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle because the extra money doesn't improve their financial stability, it just fuels more spending. The solution here is to create a simple rule. Whenever income increases, commit to saving at least a fixed percentage of it before adjusting lifestyle. If a student saves 20% of that $300 immediately, they've built a cushion without feeling deprived, while still enjoying some of the benefits of increased earnings. An inspiring example is a student who worked in retail during college. She noticed that she was spending nearly all her earnings on weekend outings and online shopping. When she decided to track her expenses, she realized that over $250 a month was going toward things she didn't even value long-term. By cutting her weekend outings in half and setting a $100 monthly fund budget, she redirected the extra $150 into an investment account. Over 3 years, she had built up over $5,000 simply by reducing overspending on lifestyle choices. While her friends complained about being broke, she had a growing financial cushion because she recognized the problem of convenience-driven overspending and created a structured solution to counter it. Overspending on lifestyle and convenience keeps students stuck in financial stress because it disguises wants as needs and makes money vanish before it can serve bigger goals. The fix isn't about giving up everything enjoyable, but about making conscious decisions and substitutions that stretch income further, leaving room for both fun and financial growth. A major reason students remain broke is the lack of basic financial education, and this problem runs deeper than many realize. From an early age, most people are taught math, science, and history, but almost no one is taught how to manage money, budget effectively, or understand credit and debt. By the time students enter college, they're expected to handle tuition, living expenses, and sometimes credit cards, all without ever learning the fundamentals of financial literacy. The result is predictable: students fall into bad habits, rely on trial and error, and often make mistakes that follow them for years. They graduate with debt, no savings, and little idea of how to manage their income, which locks them into a financial cycle that feels impossible to escape. Without financial education, money feels like a mystery, something that comes and goes without explanation, leaving students powerless over their own future. The solution starts with building awareness and education in simple, practical ways. Financial literacy doesn't have to be complicated. It begins with understanding the basics: how to create a budget, the difference between needs and wants, the importance of saving consistently, how credit works, and why debt can either be a tool or a trap. Students can access free resources, books, podcasts, YouTube videos, even free online courses to learn these fundamentals. The key is not waiting until after graduation to figure it out, but starting while in school, even with small amounts of money. Once a student understands the principles of personal finance, they can apply them in everyday life, making smarter spending choices, avoiding unnecessary debt, and setting financial goals that guide their decisions. Financial education provides clarity, and clarity creates control. A practical example would be a student who doesn't know how credit cards actually work. Without knowledge, they might assume the minimum payment is all they need to worry about, not realizing that interest charges can snowball. A $100,000 balance left unpaid can quickly grow to $200,000 or more with fees and high interest rates. Without financial education, the student continues swiping, assuming they'll deal with it later, only to graduate with thousands of dollars in credit card debt. But let's imagine the same student took the time to learn how credit cards function, perhaps by watching a short video or reading a beginner's guide. They'd understand that paying the balance in full avoids interest entirely, and that using credit responsibly builds a strong credit score that will help with renting an apartment or buying a car after graduation. That small piece of education changes the outcome dramatically, turning credit from a trap into a tool. Another powerful example comes from students who learn how to budget effectively. Without education, most students operate in the dark. They spend as money comes in and hope it lasts until the next paycheck. But with even a basic budget, they can assign their income to categories: rent, food, transportation, savings, and entertainment. A student making $800 a month from a part-time job might struggle to make ends meet without a plan. But once they create a budget, they see that $400 covers rent, $200 covers food and transportation, and $100 can be saved, leaving $100 for entertainment. Suddenly, what felt impossible now feels manageable because they understand how to allocate resources intentionally. There are also examples of students who take financial education a step further and explore investing. Many assume investing is only for the wealthy, but even small amounts can grow significantly over time. A student who learns about compound interest and decides to invest $50 a month into an index fund could, over 10 years, see that money grow far beyond the contributions. Without financial education, that same $50 would likely be spent on takeout or convenience items, disappearing instantly with no long-term value. The lack of financial education isn't the student's fault. It's rarely taught in schools or emphasized by parents who may also lack the knowledge. But recognizing this gap is the first step toward solving it. By seeking out information, even in small doses, students can avoid common traps like unnecessary debt, poor budgeting, and reckless spending. Knowledge turns money from something intimidating into something manageable, and once students feel confident with the basics, they can make decisions that set them up for stability instead of struggle. Debt dependency is one of the biggest traps that keeps students broke, and it often starts with good intentions. The problem is that students are encouraged, almost pushed, into borrowing money before they've even had the chance to earn a consistent income. Student loans are marketed as the only way to get an education, and credit card companies target young people with flashy rewards, sign-up bonuses, and the promise of instant financial freedom. At first, borrowing feels like an easy solution. Tuition, rent, or a night out with friends doesn't seem like a big deal when it's covered by borrowed money. But over time, this dependency on debt becomes a lifestyle. Instead of learning how to manage money, students learn how to rely on credit, and that habit carries over well into adulthood. By the time they graduate, they are not just broke, they are buried under obligations that will take years or even decades to pay off. The solution begins with changing the way students view debt. Debt itself isn't always the enemy. It can be a useful tool when handled wisely, like using a credit card to build credit while paying it off in full every month, or taking on a small student loan to cover unavoidable expenses. The real issue is dependency, using debt as the first option rather than the last. Students need to shift their mindset so debt becomes a strategic tool, not a financial crutch. This means asking critical questions before borrowing. Do I really need this? Is there a cheaper alternative? How will I pay this back, and what's the long-term cost? At the same time, students should focus on creating systems that reduce reliance on borrowing, like setting up emergency funds, finding part-time income streams, or cutting down on non-essential expenses. The more proactive steps they take, the less they will lean on credit to survive. A practical example is the difference between two students managing college expenses. Student A covers tuition with loans and then uses a credit card to pay for food, clothes, and entertainment. They pay the minimum balance every month, thinking they'll deal with it after graduation. By the time they finish school, they owe $30,000 in student loans and $5,000 in credit card debt, plus accumulated interest. They feel trapped, working just to pay back borrowed money. Student B, on the other hand, also takes out loans for tuition but makes a point to work part-time during the semester. They create a budget that covers essentials, cook meals at home, and avoid unnecessary debt. If they use a credit card, they pay it in full each month, building their credit without letting it spiral into a burden. At graduation, student B still has loans but no consumer debt, giving them a far stronger financial position than student A. Another example involves a student who signed up for multiple credit cards because of attractive rewards programs. Each card came with perks like cashback or discounts, but because they never fully paid off the balance, the interest far outweighed any benefits. A $500 shopping spree turned into $650 after a few months of minimum payments. Instead of earning rewards, they were paying penalties. When this student finally learned about debt management, they realized that the credit card companies or rewards were simply bait. They consoled unnecessary cards, kept one for emergencies, and focused on paying off the debt aggressively. Over a year, they cleared their balance, and for the first time, they experienced what it felt like to not owe money for past purchases. The psychological toll of debt dependency is just as damaging as the financial side. Students often feel trapped, anxious, and unable to plan for the future because every paycheck is already committed to covering debt. Breaking free requires both education and discipline. For example, one student I knew used a simple debt snowball method to take control. They listed all their debts from smallest to largest, paid off the smallest one first while making minimum payments on the rest, and then rolled that payment into the next debt. Within 2 years, they had cleared all their credit card balances while still in school. By reducing dependency and focusing on paying down what they owed, they completely shifted their financial reality. Debt dependency is a cycle that begins with easy borrowing and ends with years of repayment. Students fall into the trap because borrowing feels like a quick solution, but the long-term cost keeps them financially stuck. By viewing debt as a tool rather than a lifeline, asking the right questions before borrowing, and creating systems to minimize reliance on credit, students can prevent themselves from carrying the heavy burden of financial obligations that drain their income and limit their freedom. A major issue that keeps students broke is the absence of any savings or emergency buffer. The problem is that most students live with the assumption that they don't earn enough to save, so every dollar is spent as soon as it arrives. Rent, tuition, food, and a little bit of entertainment consume the entire budget, and saving feels impossible. The real danger is that, without even a small safety net, every unexpected expense becomes a crisis. A flat tire, a broken laptop, or a sudden medical bill forces students to either borrow money, rely on credit cards, or skip important needs altogether. This creates constant stress and reinforces the paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle because any progress they make is wiped out the moment something unexpected happens. Living without savings doesn't just mean being broke, it means being financially vulnerable to even the smallest setback. The solution starts with reframing what savings actually means. Many students assume they need to put aside large amounts of money to make a difference, but the truth is that saving is about consistency. Not setting aside even $5 or $10 a week creates momentum. Over a semester, that small habit can turn into hundreds of dollars, which is enough to cover minor emergencies and prevent the need to borrow. Students can set up automatic transfers into a separate account, so the money is saved before they even notice it's gone. The key is to treat savings as a non-negotiable expense, just like rent or food, instead of an afterthought that only happens when there's something left over. Over time, this builds discipline, and more importantly, it builds peace of mind because there's a cushion to fall back on when life doesn't go as planned. A practical example is a student working part-time and making $6,000 a month. At first, they feel like saving isn't realistic because their income is barely covering expenses. But by committing to save just $20 per paycheck, less than the cost of 2 fast food meals, they manage to put aside $40 a month. Over the course of a year, that grows to nearly $500. While that amount won't solve every problem, it's enough to cover things like car repairs, new textbooks, or an unexpected utility bill without creating debt. This small habit also trains the student to prioritize financial stability, and as their income grows in the future, scaling up that savings percentage becomes much easier. Another example involves a student who chose to build a simple emergency fund before spending money on luxuries. Instead of buying the latest phone on release day, they stuck with their older model for another year and funneled the $50 monthly payment they would have spent into savings. Within a year, they had $600 in an emergency account. Later that semester, when their car battery died, they were able to replace it immediately without panic or borrowing. That one decision kept them from going deeper into debt and proved to them that a buffer, even a small one, creates financial freedom. There's also the psychological impact of having no savings. Constantly worrying about what will happen if something goes wrong drains mental energy and makes it harder to focus on school. Students without a buffer often avoid thinking about money altogether because it feels hopeless, which only makes the situation worse. But once a savings habit is established, even with small amounts, the stress begins to fade. A student who knows they have a few $100s set aside feels more in control and less anxious, which allows them to make clearer financial decisions. A powerful story is that of a student who created a rule to always save the first 10% of any money they received, whether from work, gifts, or side hustles. Even when the amounts were small, the consistency paid off. Over time, they built a savings cushion of over 1,000 zlotys, which gave them options. While friends struggled with overdraft fees and maxed out credit cards, this student had the ability to handle emergencies calmly. They weren't earning more than anyone else, but by making savings a priority instead of an afterthought, they broke the cycle of financial stress that keeps so many students hand to mouth. The lack of savings and emergency funds leaves students trapped in financial vulnerability, where every setback feels like a disaster. The fix doesn't come from suddenly saving large sums, but from creating the discipline of consistent, small contributions that add up over time. Even the smallest buffer can be the difference between staying afloat or falling deeper into debt. One of the most overlooked reasons students stay broke is the failure to build income beyond school. The problem is that many students treat college years as a time to only focus on classes, leaving income generation as something to worry about after graduation. While the focus on education is important, relying solely on loans, allowances, or part-time jobs with no growth potential keeps students stuck in a cycle of limited income. They often finish school with little to no experience outside of academics and find themselves competing for jobs without any real skills or financial base. Even those who do work while studying usually stick to minimum wage jobs with no plan to expand their earning potential. This creates a financial ceiling, where money coming in is always just enough to get by, but never enough to build a foundation for the future. The solution lies in recognizing that the college years are the perfect time to start building income streams and gaining valuable experience. Even small side hustles, internship, or freelance work can make a massive difference, not just in terms of money earned, but also in building skills that translate into higher, paying opportunities later. Students can leverage online platforms to tutor, freelance in writing or design, sell products, or even start small businesses with minimal upfront cost. The point is not necessarily to replace a full-time job, but to diversify income so that they're not completely dependent on a single paycheck or loan. By building multiple streams of income, students not only cover immediate expenses, but also learn how to manage money in a way that prepares them for life after graduation. A practical example would be a student who works part-time at a fast food restaurant, earning around $500 a month. On its own, this income barely covers rent and food, keeping the student stuck in survival mode. But if the same student dedicates 5 hours a week to freelancing on the side, maybe doing graphic design, tutoring, or online writing, they could bring in an additional $200 to $300 a month. That extra money could be directed towards savings, reducing the need for loans, or investing in skill-building courses. Over time, this side hustle not only adds financial breathing room, but also provides valuable experience and connections that will be useful after graduation. Another example comes from students who use internships strategically. Instead of viewing them only as resume builders, these students see internships as income, generating opportunities that can lead to full-time positions. One student took a paid internship in digital marketing during their second year of college. While their friends relied entirely on part-time retail jobs, this student earned slightly more per hour while also gaining skills in social media management and advertising. By the time they graduated, they already had 2 years of experience in a growing field, which gave them an advantage in landing a well-paying job. That early decision to pursue an income stream with long-term potential prevented them from falling into the post-graduation trap of scrambling for low-paying work. There are also countless stories of students who built small businesses while in school. For example, a student with photography skills started offering graduation and event photo packages on weekends. What began as a side gig to make extra cash grew into a small business that consistently generated income. This allowed them to pay for school supplies and save money, while also giving them a strong portfolio of work. Unlike a traditional part-time job, this business taught them entrepreneurship, client management, and pricing strategies, skills that would serve them long after college. The psychological impact of creating income beyond school is equally important. Students who find ways to make extra money often feel more confident and less trapped by their financial situation. They begin to see money as something they can actively create, rather than something they passively receive or borrow. This mindset shift is critical because it empowers students to take control of their financial future instead of waiting for graduation to solve their problems. The failure to build income beyond school keeps students limited, relying solely on loans or low-wage jobs with no growth. By taking advantage of side hustles, internships, freelancing, or small business opportunities, students can expand their income streams, gain valuable experience, and create financial stability even before entering the full-time workforce. So to quickly recap, most students stay broke because they live paycheck to paycheck, overspend on lifestyle and convenience, lack basic financial education, rely too heavily on debt, don't build any savings buffer, and fail to create income streams beyond school. But the good news is, every single one of these problems has a solution if you take action early. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment below with the biggest money mistake you've seen students make. I'd love to hear your take. And don't go anywhere, because in the next video, we're diving into how to build wealth as a student on almost no money. Practical steps you can start using right now to flip the cycle and finally get ahead. Trust me, you don't want to miss it.